The Olympics, a global athletic spectacle celebrating the pinnacle of strength, endurance and speed. Broadcasted to hundreds of millions of people, the games date back around 3,000 years to the Peloponnese in ancient Greece, and in 1894, Pierre de Coubertin launched his plan to revive the Olympic Games. In 1896, the first games of the modern era were held in Athens, showcasing the dedication and endeavour of humankind as individuals pushed themselves to the absolute limit for personal glory and to entertain the cheering spectators. Yet the 20th century saw the games increasingly characterised by sinister undertones, spanning from becoming an instrument to demonstrate racial supremacy or proving the abundant development of political communities. What started out with honest and honourable intentions quickly became a corrupted farce that compelled athletes to swap rigorous training for a concoction of pharmaceutical substances. Here is the story of the Soviet Union's blueprint to conquer the sporting world. The Soviet Union lost 27 million combatants and civilians in World War II, 20 million of which were men. Therefore, by 1945 the country had a drastically lowered male population, including a wounded masculine consciousness trying to shake off the trauma of the invasion, as well as the high casualties. There was an extreme number of veterans bearing physical defects and wounds from their service, and an increased prominence of women in the public spaces of cities and agricultural centres. Despite this, the Soviet state was incredibly successful in swiftly recultivating an image of machismo and strength to trigger alarm bells in the West. Footage of muscular athletic Soviet men was broadcasted across the nation and world in various forms, including parades, films and posters. This depicted figure represented the new Soviet man, a symbol of masculinity and socialist progress, who would stand ready to defend the motherland from any imminent threat. It was ultimately a method of overcompensating to a degree, hiding the vicious toll that the bloodiest conflict of all time had had on the Russian population. After the Second World War, the USSR adjusted its foreign policy strategies according to the newly emerged global political situation. Competing successfully in international sports was now recognised as a worthy and effective instrument against the ideological opponent within the Cold War. Soviet athletes were to demonstrate socialist achievements to a global audience and represent the ideal stereotype of a harmonically developed, ideologically convinced, plain and modest Soviet sportsman. Because of the Olympic Games' particular importance as a sporting climax within an internationally approved and socially highly appreciated sports movement with its own ideals and values, Soviet officials developed a special interest in Olympic sport. They wanted to showcase the strength and skill of the Soviet population on the world stage. Ultimately, the Soviet hierarchy saw beating the Western powers in these games as a symbol of their supremacy and the brilliance of the Soviet bloc. Rio de Janeiro, late 1983. Months before they announced the boycott of the Los Angeles Olympics, sports officials of the Soviet Union sent extensive instructions to the head of the country's track and field team. The directive stated that oral steroid tablets were no longer considered enough to secure dominance at the Olympic Games. Injections of 3 other kinds of anabolic steroids would be necessary to secure supremacy of its top athletes. This anecdote is reinforced by a document obtained by the New York Times from a former chief medical doctor for Soviet track and field events, as it referenced a meeting on November 24, 1983 between the Soviet Sports Committee. This document approved the use of individual profiles of special pharmacological preparation on track and field athletes of all disciplines, along with caveating that, without injecting forms of anabolic steroids, a dramatic improvement in Soviet athlete performance at the Olympics was not guaranteed. But the 1983 document did identify one potential issue with the scheme. If the athletes were subjected to injections, there was a lack of definitive information about how long they could be detected in drug tests. The document assured the recipients that the Soviet anti-doping lab was addressing this obstacle and would have the official recommendation and conclusion no later than December the 15th of 1983. The Soviet officials drafted a plan for administering the steroid injections within the first 2 weeks of March and the last week of February 1984, ending the regimen 145 to 157 days before competition began. Soviet athletes had won 195 medals, including 80 golds in the 1980 Moscow Olympics, the highest medal count for any of the 80 participating countries, and they wanted this trend to continue. Although the world anti-doping movement was in its infancy, sports officials were still aware of the need to combat drugs at major competitions. Anabolic steroids had been banned by the International Olympic Committee, and testing for them debuted at the 1976 Games, making the regimen proposed by Soviet officials entirely prohibited. The 1983 letter providing the instructions referred to special pharmacological profiles. This boiled down to 3 additional drugs, being retobolil, stromba and strombajet. These were all forms of the steroids nandrolone, decanoate and stanozolol. It was stated that 3 to 5 vials of 50 mg should be injected into each athlete, with the final doses administered 145 to 157 days before the Olympics. The letter claimed that the main opponents of Soviet athletes would use the injection form of anabolic steroids at the upcoming Olympic Games, seeking to legitimize the plan. The letter was signed and archived by Dr. Portugalov and stated outright that top athletes with chances of winning medals were prime candidates for injections. Dr. Vorobayev, the main whistleblower behind this information, was one of the Soviet Union's first full-time sports doctors. He specialized in improving coordination, strength and flexibility among elite athletes, with particular expertise in foot injuries, spending over 3 decades with the Soviet track team. In 2011, he moved from Russia to Chicago, where he proceeded to reveal to New York Times reporters all facets of the plan. He stressed the overriding atmosphere in which winning was supremely important, as drugs displaced training as the primary method of preparation. Vorobayev said he was unsure whether the doping scheme detailed in the 1983 document was actually carried out. Not everyone chose to use illicit substances, he stated, defending Soviet sports as not uniformly tainted. But low doses of oral steroids were common among top track athletes. In May 1984, roughly 5 months after the document outlining a doping plan was circulated, the Soviet Union withdrew from the Los Angeles Games, citing the anti-Olympian actions of the US authorities and organizers. This would suggest that we never got to see the immediate results of this doping scheme upon the performances of Soviet athletes at the Olympics, or so it may seem.
We have breaking news in the sports world. This morning, Russia received a 4-year ban for doping.
The IAAF banned Russian athletes after an investigation uncovered state-sponsored doping.
And Russia has been banned.
The World Anti-Doping Agency WADA recommended imposing a ban on Russia.
Thank you for watching, guys, and please like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. If this video reaches 150 likes, then I will release a second video detailing the more recent intricacies and intrigues of the Russian doping movement, which has resulted in Russia's ban from the 2016 Rio Olympics and the 2020 Tokyo Olympics.